Well, good afternoon to all of you and welcome to the Blavatnik School of Government. I'm Nairi Woods, Dean of the school, as you might have gathered. And it's a huge pleasure to have you all here for this year's lecture by Kyoto Prize laureate of 2023, Nalini, Malani. It's one of the joys for the Blavatnik School of Government to host the Kyoto laureates each year, that one of the three laureates each year is from the arts. The arts are so important to a school of government that has many social scientists in it, and social scientists are always looking at the middle of the bell curve. And what we don't see in those bell curves are the fears, the passions, the joys, the hope, the soul of humans and of their communities. And artists do that for us so beautifully and sometimes so challengingly. So to all the artists in the room, a very warm welcome, and I hope you'll spend more time here at the Blavatnik School, and you'll be very welcome to do that. But on behalf of the Inamori Foundation, who I'm delighted to say are here with us, and my colleagues here at the Blavatnik School, let me welcome Nalini Malani, who is a pioneer of video art in India and beyond India. She's described as creating phantasmagorical spaces. I had to practice that word. Phantasmagorical spaces. It's been wonderful having Nalini among us, and I will say no more because she herself is going to convey to you what she does. When Nalini finishes speaking, you will see a video, a treat, but also a challenging treat, and she will warn you that some of that video you might find disturbing. And then I'm delighted to say that Malika Kumbera Lundras, from the keeper of Eastern art at the Ashmolean Museum, will curate a question and answer session where you can take your questions to Nalini and to Malika, who will be on stage. So a big warm welcome to all of you, but a very special welcome from all of us to the artist herself, Nalini Malani. Thank you, Nalini.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. I have a bit of a voice problem, so just bear with me. It's a bit sexy. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredibility. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. Charles Dickens described in A Tale of Two Cities an age of radical opposites taking place at the same time. More than ever in this period of the 21st century, we see ourselves in a situation of radical opposites. Though these opposites are determined by human factors, they are not determined or in control by the common man, or should I say woman. Yet they are the ones who suffer the most. My latest artwork is called My Reality is Different, a 9-channel video animation chamber made as part of London's National Gallery First Contemporary Fellowship. In this, I overwrite with my iPad animation drawings a selection of their paintings collection and add a series of portraits of the subaltern caught in the worldwide financial web. The National Gallery is a collection of about 2,600 Western European paintings by 750 artists. These artworks tell stories from the 13th to the 19th century, biblical, mythical, historical. They show us the world from the point of view of Western patriarchy, the clergy, the royalty, and often colonial view, where woman, the subaltern, and nature are suppressed as if it were a God-given birthright. By playing the 9 channels, each of different duration, as overlapping images, my reality is different, is a dynamic palimpsest with endless combinations of images which makes visible an alternative, non-linear part of the human mind. With this experimental art form, I address the spectators as an active audience, where they become dynamic co-curators and co-producers of meaning rather than passive receptors. My reality is different. With 250,000 visitors in 3 months, this last spring became the most visited contemporary art exhibition at the National Gallery. The virtual graffitiing on these masterpieces was both a critique and a homage. Gabriele Fidaldi, the director of the National Gallery, described my reality as different, as a constant destroying and rediscovering as a counteraction that what's gone before. Such robust critique keeps the collection alive, he said. My reality is different. This could have been the overall title of my art in the last 50 years. This not only because as a female artist, coming from a refugee family, I do experience time and again reality differently as it unfolds and is politicized and historicized. But most importantly, what that I wanted with my art is to make a difference in that reality. The artist's antenna works like a Cassandra, predicting how the future form will come out of current attitudes. This does not imply that my antenna works like a doomsday oracle, although my quest is to put inherited iconographies and stereotypes of culture under intense pressure. My critically charged art can be described as excess, exceeding the conventional, going beyond the boundaries of legitimized narrative. Once caught in the seduction of its beauty, the artwork sets up a stream of consciousness, one thing telescoping into the other, recreating the complexity of how thought, emotion, and memory work at any given time, relieving anxiety and decreasing the pain with as a backdrop the fundamental flaws of human nature with its capacity for acts of unimaginable horror committed in the name of ideals. As Lewis Carroll wrote, imagination is the only weapon in the war against reality. My story started with a drawing, a line drawn in a few weeks by a man called Radcliffe, commissioned by the Parliament of the United Kingdom in 1947. It was decided that British India, in a partition, was to be split up into 2 sovereign states of Pakistan and India. Pakistan was intended as a Muslim homeland, while India remained secular. And with this rather simple action, the drawing of a line, the future of millions was decided, a whole subcontinent creating 2 nations with traumas, the wounds of which would last till the present day. For the 50 years of independence exhibition, Mappings, Shared Histories, A Fragile Self, I made from a quilt that belonged to my grandmother a history canvas titled Excavated Images. The quilt had served as a sack for the family when they escaped to Bombay as refugees of partition. I stained the fabric with paint in the colors of sweat, blood, and body ooze, and combined this with an archaeology of personal images, memories, and emotions, the tragic moments in the history of this young nation. In order to involve the public, I provided golden safety pins with secret wish threads attached to them to be pinned to the quilt. This combines a Muslim and a Hindu religious tradition into one single, melding two customs. Starting in New Delhi, the exhibition traveled to Karachi, and by the time Excavated Images was shown in Bombay, it was completely covered with pins on both sides. At the time, my father was still in Karachi, in British India. My mother noticed in a newspaper advertisement for a lawyer's job at Tata Airlines. Seeing the opportunity, she took the initiative to phone and explain the situation and offered to come herself for the interview to stand in for her husband. To his surprise, when my father landed in Bombay, he was expected to go directly to their offices in Calcutta. In Calcutta, ours was a very modest life, with one room divided by a curtain. My mother took me to see children's movies on Saturday mornings and as well to her voluntary work at the Bengali refugee camps. My father's job opened up the world, as my mother and I could fly once per year anywhere with free tickets from what became Air India International. At the age of 12, my first international journey was to Japan, followed soon by Paris and London. Here started a lifelong process of discovering how visual language travels and how it takes root in different cultures and in trying to make sense of this puzzle called human life. Drawing gives you an instrument of observation to get a grip on outer life, as I was taught during my biology lessons when I learned to minutely observe dissections of plants, insects, and small animals. A few years later, on my journey in Kenya, where I for the first time was confronted with racial discrimination, I learned that even more importantly, drawing works as well for ordering an inner reality. Drawing became a life-essential way of relating to the outer world and the inner world, without which I could not do a single day in my life. An inner reality of fears, anxieties, uncertainties, a reality with which more than half of the world lives, and which seems not to be understood or acknowledged by the ones in power. Of course, my father, being practical and having experienced that the family lost everything during partition, he wanted me to study law as he had done. After all, if for a second time we had to flee, what could we take to the next country? Nothing more than what we had in our minds. To become an artist was no choice. It was my only way to make sense of life. Thanks to the convincing words and loyal support of my mother, I went to the JJ School of Art in Bombay for the period 1964 to 69. Old-fashioned British oil painting oriented education, with a completely outdated library from which one was not even allowed to borrow books. I would rather spend my time next door at the School of Architecture with deeply engaged students full of ideas related to Bauhaus and social architecture. Or at the Bhulabai Memorial Institute, by coincidence next door to the Sindhi refugee colony where my parents lived, where I was lucky to get a studio already in 1964. I became friends with the now legendary senior artists Guy Tonde, Tayyab Mehta, and M.F. Hussain. Every week we went to see new Indian regional films and alternative European cinema. Guy Tonde generously lent me his books on Western art history, Indian philosophy, and Zen Buddhism. In my spare time, I worked in the same building as a volunteer for the theatre director Satyadev Dubey, whom I assisted with making posters, costumes, and postcards for invitees. From Dubey's plays, I learned the value of reusing old epics, myths, and stories to make them germane to the contemporary moment. In the same locality, 100 meters to the left of my parents' home, the artist Akbar Padamsee started the Vision Exchange workshop in 1969. For this, Padamsee selected a small group of artists and filmmakers, wanting them to work and discuss the new mass media like film and photography, wanting them to work and discuss new mass media and like film and photography, as this was material that would make the future. Being invited as the youngest and only female, just after I obtained a diploma in the fine arts at Sir J.J. School of Art, the Vision Exchange workshop felt like a dream. Before even the first film camera arrived, I already made a series of large camera-less photograms, which I continued in 1970, imaginary blueprints of an ideal city plan for a modern India, with a size of 96 by 73 centimeters. These photographs were unusually large for those times, that allowed me to exhibit them in relation to my abstract paintings. At the Vision Exchange workshop, in the summer of 1969, in a period of 6 weeks non-stop work, I finished the painstaking and complicated stop-motion animation, Dream Houses. The inspiration for this animation came from Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who believed in the potential of art as a vehicle for social transformation, and from the color theories of Johannes Itten, but most importantly from the Indian architect Charles Correa, with his visionary and humanistic ideas for the urban poor. I was the most prolific member and made additionally a series of short black and white experimental films on what it felt to be a young woman in Bombay. These early film works on the female body puzzled my male colleagues at the workshop, and according to them, I was wasting my time. On a scholarship between 1970 and 72, Paris became the university of my life. Here, in contrast to the art scene in Bombay, engagement in politics was very much part of the scene. Still under the influence of 1968, I participated in mass demonstrations and was inspired at the Sorbonne by the lectures of Noam Chomsky, Claude Lévi-Strauss, Michel Léris, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Simone de Beauvoir. At the City University, intense intellectual discussions focused on the Third World, colonial and post-colonial studies, and anti-imperial struggles. Meeting young filmmakers at the Cinémathèque Française, such as Alain René, Jean-Luc Godard, William Klein, and Chris Marker, made me aware of film as a prise de conscience, a political awareness. All this together helped me to develop an eye for observing the reality of my homeland from outside. Paris was very attractive as part of the West that ruled the hegemony of contemporary art. It inspired me to make new series of photo collages and write several scripts for short films and film sculptures. But instead of staying on, I returned to Bombay, motivated to contribute as an artist to the progress of the young Indian nation. Coming from a region in the world where many women face difficulties in achieving social advancement, I continued my series of films. This started with a documentary project in a Muslim slum in the area called Bandra in Bombay. The film was intended as a conscious-raising project that would travel from one slum to another to make their inhabitants aware of their rights. The project was never finished. After months of work, one morning I arrived at a completely empty space. The city municipality had overnight bulldozed the whole area. In the same year, I made the black and white film Taboo in Rajasthan while assisting the film director Mani Kaul on his shoot for the film Duvidha. Taboo deals with the unnoticed discrimination against women in India that still is being practiced and justified by caste and religion, especially in certain Orthodox communities. One might wonder, what is the taboo about? The answer lies in the strict separation in certain castes between what women are allowed to do in the weaving process. It is an absolute taboo for these women to touch the loom. As such, women are excluded from the most important and creative part of the process, a metaphor that even today stands for the discrimination that women face. Like the words of Charles Dickens, already the late 60s and early 70s in India showed that radical opposites were taking place. The Nehruvian period came to an end, and it became clear that most of the utopian dreams could never be realized for the common family. The old dominating factors of religion, caste, gender, and class determined your life. Hence, I decided in 1976 to add another film to my animation Dream Houses of 1969, intended to be screened next to each other as a double film projection installation. This film installation, Utopia, shows a young woman in black and white film who realizes that these new buildings she's looking at will never be within her reach. After a spring of hope for India, the winter of despair had set in. Rejected and ignored by the Vision Exchange Workshop members, these experimental films surfaced again in 2012 when I moved my studio. Their value as early experimental sociopolitically engaged film was finally acknowledged and are now in a digitalized format in museum collections around the world, like the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Centre Pompidou in Paris, M+ in Hong Kong, and the KNMA in New Delhi. From 1970 to 2003, I no longer lived in the elite Warden Road, but had my studio in the bustling area of the electric wholesale market in Lohar Chal in Bombay. It was a radical socio-political change, a socio-cultural change, where life on the streets became an obsession, where daily workers found their home and family life as pavement dwellers. In the late 80s, to search out new artistic expressions was a dire need. The Indian art scene was in an ivory tower, catering largely to the elite. With no connection with the nation's drastically changing socio-political reality. How to confront the bourgeois audience and shake them up from their equanimity. How to bring the voice of the voiceless, the the predications of the oppressed to a larger audience within India and internationally in the Western art world, but as well beyond the West. Invited to exhibit in 1991 at the posh South Bombay Jahangir Art Gallery, I wanted the audience to become part of this other world. Alleyway of Lohar Chal became my first installation / shadow play with ink drawings on 5 polyester sheets hanging as scrolls in a staggered zigzag formation, becoming a see-through, walk-through installation. The palimpsest images appear and disappear like pale ghosts of a dehumanized world. Here one was encompassed, could not escape it, as one walked through. Here the shadow of a lower strata would touch your body. Alleyway of Lohar Chal was not a painting that one could observe from a safety of a distant chair. Socio-politically engaged art like this continued a year later with my wall drawing City of Desires, which I referred to in a newspaper from '92 as an impermanent site-specific installation. For this, I took over a White Cube gallery in South Bombay as an open studio where I worked in situ. The exigencies of the threat to democratic freedom led me and other female artists to look for these new materials and new forms. City of Desires became a series which I have continued to make since 30 years. Within India, for instance, at the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art in New Delhi, and internationally, at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. And Centre Pompidou in Paris and Castello de Rivoli, with most recent one this year in Montreal and Seoul. Revisiting subjects is typical of my art as I work in series on specific subjects over long periods of time. As I feel unable to contain it in one single work, or when the subject becomes topical again, or when I feel I have to give a new dimension. These wall drawings have, at the end of the exhibition period, different erasure performances, which are not just a destruction, but an exercise in memory, as this is all what is left. How this erasure performance looks like is not communicated to the museum or the public in advance. At the Musée Cantonal des Beaux-Arts in Lausanne, the audience was surprised as they expected to see a performance when they were all invited to perform the erasure. Parents and children stood next to the international curators and city civil servants and erased together. At the Centre Pompidou in Paris, and thank you public ceremony was organized where the full exhibition team, including the director, got a bouquet of red roses. After this, they were asked, to their surprise, to use these same roses for the erasure performance. In the 90s, an inner drive to connect to larger audiences led to working in experimental theatre in collaboration with performers and theatre directors, which resulted in Medea Material in 1993 and The Job in 1997. At the same time, in November 95, the newly elected Shiv Sena-led government renamed the city of Bombay to Mumbai, after the city's patron deity, goddess Mamba Devi. These theatre plays exposed new artistic expression and experiments with contemporary versions of Greek tragedies and Bertolt Brecht's epic theatre, but were put into an Indian setting, as I believe in the universality of themes such as conflict, reconciliation, oppression, dreams, and myths. Although a great success, unfortunately the theatre plays could not travel internationally. Therefore, I changed the concept of the play by going one step further, capturing the actors on camera, so that with projections I could show them everywhere. I call this format video plays. A format which would help me further with the decentralization of art. Sorry. During a 6-month residency at the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum in 1999-2000, I made the video play Hamlet Machine in collaboration with the Buto dancer Nobuo Harada. His body as a canvas soaked up history with projections of newly made and historical footage. Hamlet Machine is originally an adaptation of Shakespeare's Hamlet by the German playwright Heiner Müller. It consists of 4 video projections in a dark theatrical setting with 3 screens forming a large triptych, and the 4th screen consisting of a thick layer of salt on the floor, a reference to Gandhi's Salt March. For me, the Hamlet character resembled at that time not only the state of India, a country in transition, undecided about its political and economic stance, but as a universal play, asking questions and expressing traumas that concern all of contemporary humankind. Thanks to its universal character and due to its digital format, Hamlet Machine, as an experimental video play, traveled the last 2 decades to more than 15 countries spread over 4 continents. A step further with these video plays became a large-scale outdoor, open-air public video presentation, as for instance the commission in 2014 Edinburgh for the commemoration of the beginning of World War I, projected on the entire south and west facade of the National Gallery. Just like the mural paintings by Kyoto in the churches or in the Buddhist caves in Aurangabad, these outdoor multi-narrative video plays are meant to be seen as a collective experience. As in Search of Vanished Blood was screened directly after the ceremonial Royal Edinburgh military tattoo, it was attended by massive crowds that for the occasion could take over the traffic-free streets along the Scottish National Gallery. With Cassandra's head floating over the walls, this video work combined archival footage of World War I and the monstrosities of World War II with phantasmagorical animations of a future, a military heritage, one which is connected to Britain's imperial incursions in South Asia. Sometimes it so happens that in the constant process of experimenting, you find a solution in the combination of 2 completely different ways of working. To find a solution for the actor to change her costume on stage during the play, The Job, I came up with reverse painted transparent cylinders that could go over the actor so she would become a different person, pulling these cylinders up and down, creating intriguing shadows which led to my shadow plays such as The Sacred and the Profane. Combining rotating reverse painted cylinders with video as light source became what I call video shadow plays. This new type of work, sorry, I have to blow my nose. This new type of work was to become my most successful art form, in which I could make tangible a different kind of working of the mind beyond the Western linear view. The multi-layering palimpsest created spaces of wonder, appealing to memory while referencing epic mythological characters, narratives, allegorical fictions, and political exigencies. It is this radically inventive art practice which became my international signature, especially when shown at Documenta 13 in Castle in 2012. And a few years later, at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in the exhibition Scenes of a New Heritage, or at the solo exhibition Vision in Motion at the inauguration of the M+ Museum in Hong Kong, where I had 1.2 million visitors in a period of 11 months. My latest game changer happened in 2017 when I was introduced to the iPad by my architecture artist friend, Salim Karimji. It gave me a studio on the move, where I could get a grip on things that agitated me by making drawings as notebook animations on daily politics, other people's writings, and even mundane aspects of life which I might have experienced. I could question them to show a different angle as a protest or even as a joke. Drawing them directly on the iPad with my index finger, not with an Apple Pencil, there is a sensitivity with the fingertip which is erotic and raw. There's something very direct about the process of drawing, rubbing, scratching, and erasing to do with the messing around one's mind. I feel like a woman with thoughts and fantasies shooting from my head. In a period of less than 5 years, I made the images and the audio for more than 100 animations. Exhibiting no longer depended on galleries or museums with long-term plannings, as I presented these animations like thought bubbles directly and for free on Instagram, where thousands of people are following them. The appreciation was such that I decided to put the animations together in a format of an animation chamber where they become like video graffiti on the walls. An animation chamber as an agora where one could discuss the topics amongst the viewers as a cultural counter to the climate of intolerance. As such, Can You Hear Me was exhibited for 11 months in 2020 at the Whitechapel Gallery in London and became so popular that in a period of 3 years it was shown as an installation in 12 different museums around the world. To my surprise, the quality of these digital animation files was such that it even gave me the opportunity to go on the street level and fill entire buildings. For example, last year, the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts invited me for a facade commission for which I made the animation Ballad of a Woman, inspired on a poem by the Polish Nobel Prize winner Wisława Szymborska. The audience feedback was encouraging with works like these. Shown over 6 months, the characters from the epics meet and merge with multicultural voices and global feminist concerns. My reality is different. For the majority of humankind, the quotidian experience of reality in the past and in the present are different from those who dominate and manipulate worldviews in an oppressive manner, and the paradigm for a future could be different. At the age of 78, I'm still very interested in alternative systems of critical thought and passionate about pioneering artistic expression which can touch our spirits. I feel art has a function more than ever to return us to that part of the human we deny, the part that thwarts our capacity to make sense
of what we see and hear. Now more than ever, it is important to question and try to understand the vagaries and demands of cultural translation, and to create an order that oppositional voices are not feared, degraded, or dismissed, but valued. Kazuo Inamori, the initiator of the Kyoto Prize, was convinced that the future of humanity can be assured only when there is a balance between scientific development and the enrichment of the human spirit. In that line of thought, I want to thank all my fellow laureates of the Kyoto Prize. Your contribution over the decades has been such an inspiration for the world. You are the spring of hope after a winter of despair. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I want to show you a short film. It's about 20 minutes. There might be passages in the film where the text is a bit shocking. There are no images that are shocking, but the text could well be, so I just warn you in advance. It's the making of my work for the Documenta 13 called In Search of Vanished Blood. But the film is titled Cassandra's Gift. Thank you.
There is no sign of blood anywhere. I've searched everywhere. The executioner's hands are clean, his nails transparent. The sleeves of each assassin are spotless. No sign of blood. No trace of red. Not on the edge of the knife, none on the point of the sword. The ground is without stains, the ceiling white. This blood, which has disappeared without leaving a trace, isn't part of written history. Who will guide me to it? Cassandra exists in all of us. Cassandra's gift is the gift of intuitive knowledge. But just as Apollo cursed Cassandra so that no one would believe her prophecies, we too have the curse that stops us from listening to our own intuitive voice. Cassandra's gift is, I think, in the domain of female thought. The female part and the masculine part both are operative as abstract ideas within each human being. Hence, one should be working with a balance rather than weighing too much on the one or the other. At the moment, At the moment, we're living too much in a phallic world. The denigration of the female part is counter to anything called human progress. Therefore, we see so much violence taking place. I have been very interested in Christa Wolf's Cassandra, where she makes a link from the archetype Cassandra into the 20th century.
I am testing for pain. I am probing my memory the way a doctor probes a limb to see whether it has atrophied. Perhaps pain dies before we die.
What I wanted to try to do is portray different aspects of violence. Some violence which is to do with defending oneself, and the other which is to do with defending ideologies. Then I said, defending oneself. I'm thinking of the whole Naxal movement in India, where tribals are trying to defend their land from misuse and takeover by multinationals, where they will be totally deprived of their means of livelihood. I am very inspired by Mashweta Devi's story on the tribal woman Draupadi and her quest for defending her land. Draupadi was apprehended at 6:53 p.m. It took an hour to get her to camp. Questioning took another hour exactly. No one touched her, and she was allowed to sit on a canvas camp stool. At 8:57, Sena Naik's dinner hour approached, and saying, "Make her, do the needful," he disappeared. Then 1,000,000,000 moons passed, 1,000,000,000 lunar years. Opening her eyes after 1,000,000 light years, Draupadi, strangely enough, sees sky and moon. Slowly, the bloodied nail heads shift from her brain. Trying to move, she feels her arms and legs still tied to 4 posts. Something sticky under her ass and waist. Her own blood. Only the gag has been removed. Incredible thirst. Teeth. Shaming her, a tear trickles out of the corner of her eye. In the muddy moonlight, she lowers her lightless eye, sees her breasts, and understands that indeed she is made upright. Her breasts are bitten raw, the nipples torn. How many? 4, 5, 6, 7. Then Draupadi had passed out. So here she was defending her land, and here she was getting raped and raped and raped by the police. So what else to do but to pick up arms and fight for her body, for her soul, for her land, for her people, for her children. So that's violence. It's recourse to violence. There is nothing else. What else can you do? So I started to look for images, and I found some very, very interesting pictures. There is a website that the tribals themselves have put up, and from time to time it gets censored by the government. Here you see a group with very simple weapons, really, and you see a woman with hardly any clothes. She has just got something on her shoulders and a baby on her lap. What I wanted to do was try to make a drawing of this image, draw it out, erase it, draw it again, which formed a kind of animation. This was a painful process, and I had to draw it rather than shoot an image of this nature. It had to be drawn. It was a process of internalizing that transformation from a girl with a baby, with her baby, into a girl with a gun who joins the forces of the Naxals. In the process of taking care of her young one, has to finally find another means to take care, and that is violence. To find motives is quite a search. How to make it possible? Whatever one does, it's going to be tentative. So all the anxiety, the difficulties, what you see in the world is going to happen is formed in a graffiti fashion on your face, as if it's getting etched in your face. I want you to think about the worst thing on earth that could happen to you. Could you do that? You know it already? It's not working. It's more one's need to try to put it out there rather than to make a slogan out of it. To nuance it in a way where violence and the justification for violence in one case comes through in a manner where it can be convincing to the viewer. That the recourse to that violence was something that was the last resort, the only thing that community of people, the tribals, could actually do in order to defend themselves, because really there is nobody listening at the helm of affairs, nobody listening to this voice. And then there is the other kind of violence based on religious ideology, violence in the name of God. This is something baffling in today's day and age, in this day of progress. In a way, it's a kind of time warp. Nothing has moved. There are sophisticated guns, but are used by people who have what?
God on their side. A God that allows the murder of thousands of people, and where women have no voice. Here the female psyche is not allowed to operate at all. It is the aggressive male side that operates. It has become phallocentric, and the human then becomes a mutant. There is so much blood spilt, violence in the name of religious ideology, especially in India.
This is Cassandra speaking.
In the heart of darkness, under the sun of torture, to the capitals of the world, in the name of the victims.
I eject all the sperm I have received. I turn the milk of my breasts into poison. I take back the world I gave birth to. I bury it in my womb.
Down with the happiness of submission. Long live hate, rebellion, and death.
In both situations, it is the women who will suffer. It is the women who are the biggest victims, and it is the victims I want to talk about through my work. Whose opinion am I going to change? I mean, there is a sense of frustration that I do feel, but at the same time, there is a need to put an idea out there, to put a thought. That is the only way I can think. To put out a drawing in a way that people take notice and look at it differently, and not be prejudiced towards any community. There is a tendency to relegate them to a position where they are the other or outcast, but that is not the solution. And then, of course, there is the added element of the shadows that turn. They turn constantly round and round, circulating around the room over the images, trying to efface the traces of violence. The repetition, compulsion must be internalized in order for the violence to cease.
The futility of violence is so well articulated in Faiz Ahmed Faiz's poem, In Search of Vanished Blood, from which I borrow the title for this work. In search of vanished blood. There is no sign of blood anywhere. I've searched everywhere. The executioner's hands are clean, his nails transparent. The sleeves of each assassin are spotless. No sign of blood, no trace of red. Not on the edge of the knife, none on the point of the sword. The ground is without stains, the ceiling white. The ground is without stains, the ceiling white. This blood, which has disappeared without leaving a trace, is in part a written history. Who will guide me to it? It wasn't spilled in service of emperors. It earned no honor, had no wish granted. It wasn't offered in rituals of sacrifice. No cup of absolution holds it in a temple. It wasn't shed in any battle. No one calligraphed it on banners of victory. But unheard, it still kept crying out to be heard. No one had the time to listen, no one the desire. It kept crying out, this orphan blood, but there was no witness, no case filed. From the beginning, this blood was nourished only by dust. Then it turned to ashes, left no trace, became food for dust. From the beginning, this blood was nourished only by dust. Then it turned to ashes, left no trace, became food for dust.
Stage.
Thank you. Do I sit here?
Please.
I just get the water.
Yes.
Thanks. That's right.
Nalini Malani's work is immensely rich and layered with memories of culture, sociopolitical, and colonial histories. They are introspective and wonderful in showing us how she thinks with and from myths, history, and literature, while consistently focused on a feminist perspective. Through her engagement with various media and different technologies, Nalini shares a different, more informed history, addressing ongoing violence against women and children across the world. Her work is not just about looking at past tragedies, but remembering that the violence of the past continues to repeat itself today. My name is Malika Kumbera-Landris, keeper of Eastern Art in the Ashmolean Museum, and it is an honor to speak with you today, Nalini. Thank you. Nalini, would you say that your work seeks to visually portray human suffering in order to nurture contemporary life, and that the core of your work is for a humanist society?
First of all, thank you, Malika, for this interview, and thank you all for being here. That's 2 questions.
Answer either or one. Yeah.
Yes, my endeavor is to work towards a humanistic society and to find ways and means to achieve that end. Haven't reached there yet, but it's always the search. And therefore the different ways and means, that is, different materials that I use, because the contents, the subject is larger than just what one material can hold together.
You represent, for many of us, the courage of artistic expression. It is a significant challenge to be part of the fight of free expression and to address social injustice. What would you say to people, especially artists, who might be reticent to address certain sociopolitical conditions today?
The reticence comes from already a thought process in an artist where a kind of self-censorship begins to operate. And I think that the worry is more how will it be taken when it's out in the public sphere. I think that now we really have to find ways and means to put across what we really feel and what we feel is right for society in a manner where, you define forms such that you can evade the eyes of the censor, And I think it's what Greg said, in the dark times. You talk about the dark times. So I think we have to find another language.
Indeed.
There is no other way.
Right. Thank you. So who are some of the artists that you admire, and or if you could meet with one artist, either living or dead, who would it be and why?
It would be Goya.
It would be Goya. And why?
Because, I think what he did in Disasters of War and the Capriccios was a very bold set of series, and I think I learned a lot from his work, how to really put forth, the pain, the agony of the human being when the person is attacked and in the kind of oppressive society of that time. And those oppressive societies are not something that have gone away. They recur. And I think that the language that Goya gives us is something that we can really learn from. But of course, there have been other artists as well. At this moment, I look to Goya a lot.
Okay, thank you. Well, since 2007, 2008, I have been using your website to access your videos for my own teaching. In the last 5 years, you've been posting your digital works directly onto Instagram. Why do you think it's important to make your works widely and freely accessible?
First of all, I like the idea of art being in the public. To my mind, art is a 3-way process. It's the artwork, the artist, and you, the viewer. It's this way that we really wake up the art. Otherwise, it's dormant, it's asleep. And therefore, I want that art, whatever it be, whether it's mine or anybody else's, it's to partake of that in a manner that, it's accessible. It appeals to me, it says something to me. And therefore, I try to do the same. I put my ideas out there. They're small ideas and big ideas, and even things that I take from other people's writing, which I admire very much.
And I tried to find an image for it because there's a kind of cry, and I want that cry to be heard in everywhere possible. So this is the reason why it's like a diary form, but it's a diary out in the open.
Thank you, Nalini. In your lecture, you briefly touched on museums and galleries. May I push you a little to ask you your thoughts on the art world?
Well, that's vast. My own practice has been to make art in the public sphere, and often I'd like to make it such that it's just the ordinary person on the street who can see it, like projections on walls, wall drawings which I erased, and then people take away the memory of it. So the memory is very important. And that's one of the things that one takes away from museums. And because I had the great privilege of looking at the most beautiful Rembrandt etchings in the Ashmolean 2 days ago. And till today I sit and I think about the memories of that experience, and it has given me a lot. And so I rely a lot on memory, and more than galleries, it's museums that I really respect for what they have done.
Thank you. Speaking of memory, your works foster a very critical dialogue with audiences. If there was one thing that you would ask your audiences to remember, what would that be, after they look at a particular work of yours?
Well, perhaps not even my own work, but how does the person's thought process move forward? Does it in any way open another portal? Then I feel that's where, I would be really thrilled to know what was that portal that opened in the mind of the person who saw my work, and led to another way of thinking, because we all get into a habit of thinking. And how do you break that habit of thinking to look at things in a totally other way, in a more sort of cubist way, let's say? And I think that art does that. It allows you that way of, another way of looking.
So you've been awarded the Kyoto Prize in Arts and Philosophy. What does winning the prize, becoming a Kyoto Prize laureate mean to you, Nalini?
It was absolutely overwhelming. I can't tell you that when I had a Zoom call, I almost said, "Is that me?" I was looking behind me. It's been an incredible experience. It's also given me the chance to think of a really large project, which I can now really do. That possibility is there.
Thank you. Well, Nalini has very kindly agreed to take a few questions from the audience. So, if there are any questions, yes, at the back.
Hello. Thank you for that video. It was amazing. I'm wondering, because the art that you create is challenging to existing structures, if you came up against opposition in the course of your career, and how you handled that.
Well, I have come across a lot of opposition, I'm not the most popular artist in India. How do I handle that? In the sense of what is the dialogue I would have with such a person who opposes?
How did you...
Sorry?
I suppose I meant, how did you keep pushing through to get your vision out there? How were you not crushed or demoralized?
Well, I just kept on persisting, if there have been times when there has been censorship or a push for a censorship, as I was telling Malika a moment ago, that I can find a new form and still continue with the same subject, but find new ways where you can trick the person, trick the opposition, and that's what you have to do.
Thank you.
Well, by the form itself, by other means, for example, In Search of Vanished Blood. It's going to be shown in December at the Tate Modern, in case you're interested. But when you walk in, there's a kind of spectacle, and you say, well, what's happening? And you're almost like a child in wonderment because these things are moving around, but there's also a projection. What is the projection saying? And then you begin to look, as you go inwards into the work, it unfolds like an onion, and then finally you see the core of what it's like. And I find I can get away, let's say, from that kind of very dominant opposition by creating such forms that can be elusive in one sense, but if you want to catch the message, you do have it in there. So it's different forms and different ways.
I have just one question for you. I think the little movie is very, very moving. I mean, as a form of art, I was very, very moved by it. But I just want to ask you if you think that today art is more accessible to people who couldn't go to university, or accessible to everyone, actually, because your art, you mentioned that you studied in France and you were exposed in the Centre Georges Pompidou. And I think your art today is acclaimed by everyone, and it became a little accepted, I would say, for French society. But do you think that today that contributed to make it more accessible to have such other artists like you who are opposed to or who are very helping causes like all the violence against women, that is accessible to everyone? I think, what is your view as an artist over all these years?
Well, for one thing, we have access to the internet. So the entire library of what is available on art in museums is available to everybody, which already gives you, that is to say that the general public can really have that knowledge. And it's not like before the internet, you really had no means. For example, when I was a student, even getting a book on Pier la Francesca or Giotto or even Goya was very difficult. It's only later on when I had access to going to museums, etc., in the West that I could see these things. But today, any young person can go on the internet and look at these things and also study, not necessarily because it's a subject at college or school, but even for himself or herself, it's all there. So that ways of seeing you can inculcate from the very beginning, as it's possible. You just learn how to see differently now than you were seeing earlier in the years when there was no internet. So there's a great boon to you have a library sitting in your house, the entire lexicon of museum technology, the ways of looking and the ways artists have presented ideas to you, they're all there in front of you. So in my case, in a sense, it's limited. So it's the people coming to the museum who will see it. For example, yes, in the National Gallery, there were a number of visitors. But finally, when you want to access things by artists, it's the net that gives you that.
I noticed that you, at one point when you were talking about reproducing or working from an image, you mentioned that the only way you felt you could do it was by drawing. And drawing seems to be quite central to your practice generally. So I wondered if you could say something about what it is about drawing in particular that you find so compelling.
For me, drawing is like the keyboard is for a composer. So if I have thoughts, just fleeting thoughts or thoughts depending on somebody else's writing, because I take a lot from writers. Writers I admire immensely, like for example Wisława Szymborska, or nowadays I look a lot at Kafka and Orwell. So these things give you ideas, and I like to jot down these ideas in drawing form because I'm not a writer. I don't have that gift. But there is a gift given to me by that writer, so I start to make drawings on it. And then later on I can look at this whole set of drawings and I get more ideas of how I can choose other materials. For example, sometimes it's reverse painting, sometimes it can go into a shadow play or just an animation. So that's how I move on, or even just a wall drawing, an ephemeral wall drawing. So that, in that sense, it's the beginning. It's the first few lines, let's say, or the first notes, as other artists would do in other disciplines.
I'm Jane Kelly. I'm a local artist in Oxford. Your work's obviously very dark. It seems to me to be pervaded by a sense of loss. I wonder if there's anything you could say in your own life that's maybe very early on in your life that's given you that impetus.
I didn't quite understand.
What has given you the impetus to create works that are dark? I think in some ways Nalini has perhaps responded in her lecture because she shared her early life, being a refugee, crossing 1947. And clearly, I think, looking at my notes over here, that traumatic experience and that upheaval of 1947 has fed into your works. And is there something else you want to add to that?
The thing is that even though I was less than a year old when we moved from one part of what was the greater India into India itself, the atmosphere in my family was constantly the sense of loss of home. It's been there right up to my mother died in 2019, and she was 96. Until even then, she used to talk to me about the streets of Karachi and the food, the food stalls in the streets of Karachi. So her memory of home went back that far. And it's not only that, because that's not my memory, it's hers. But when, for example, so many other partitions have taken place where people have lost their homelands, I feel an affinity for that. The Rangas were moved out of Burma, and there they were in this state of limbo, nowhere to go. I mean, each of these acts are hugely traumatic for people. And then also during the pandemic, our government suddenly said all transport closes. People started to walk to their villages, miles and miles and miles, sometimes 500 to 600 miles without any transport. This is another kind of migration which was deeply, deeply traumatic. So all of these things, artists have this antenna, for other people, for the other. And that, I think, is what really feeds a lot of the art in many artists that I do admire.
Can we take one last question, please? Right up.
Your technique is very new, and do you yet feel a part of a tradition?
Well, yes, I do. I'll tell you why. Because just as much as I admire a lot of writing, that is, other poets and novelists, I also admire different styles of drawing. And I quote those drawings. For example, one of the types of drawing I do are in the Kalighat style, which for me was the beginning of modernism in India. So if I want to evoke that period, then I would make a Kali image, or even just an ordinary human being, a woman with a dog. And I use this often in my shadow plays. You suddenly see, when you say to yourself, this I know because this is Kalighat style. But it also is meant to evoke that era. It was the time when the artists were impoverished and they had no patronage either from temples or from royalty. And it was British India. So they were on the streets making these drawings, but they were making them like comic strips. It was the gossip of the area. So it was secular. And for me, that's the beginning of modernism in India. Many art historians may not agree, but for me, it was to evoke that. And so I draw in that style to evoke the area. And that is also the same with Rembrandt. I do a lot of drawings which are like Rembrandt's drawings. And it's not a copy. I use my own subject to make something with the Rembrandt line.
Well, Nalini and I spent almost a whole day looking at Rembrandts. And Nalini completely surprised me by saying Goya today. I expected you to say Rembrandt, but thank you so much, Nalini, indeed, for sharing your thoughts with us today. Please join me in thanking Nalini and congratulating her on becoming a Kyoto artist. Thank you.
Heartfelt thanks for all of us, Nalini, for a beautifully crafted lecture, and huge thanks, Malika, for such a thoughtful Q&A and for guiding us through that part. You've had a taste today of this wonderful artist. I'm thrilled to say that her work will be exhibited, as I understand it, at the Tate Modern in December, and then at the Barbican in October.
That's an India show spanning from 1975 to 1998. And there are 60 artists in that show, but I have 2 works in it.
Fantastic. So, and with this moment brings to an end the 7th Kyoto Prize at Oxford events. So I do just want to reiterate our deepest thanks to the Inamori Foundation for their extraordinary curation and thoughtfulness about this prize, and for partnering with us to bring the prize to Oxford and to Europe and to other parts of the world. A huge thanks to the laureates for giving so generously of your time, your inspiration. You leave us a huge library of memories, and thank you for that. And thanks to the amazing team here at the Blavatnik School who bring this event together and got news to all of you and brought you all here today. And thank you to all of you for being part of this celebration of human excellence. It's been a joy having you. I hope you'll be back in the Blavatnik School to other public events soon. So thank you all, and thanks once again to Nalini Malani, the Kyoto Laureate 2023 in the Arts.